The registration desk at Concordia Station smelled like metal and something faintly sweet, the kind of smell that did not belong to any single species, but had built up over decades of many of them passing through. The clerk behind the counter was a Guarani broad shoulders, for arms, skin the color of old stone, and he was staring at the new arrival with an expression that could only be described as quietly confused. The human had one bag. Not one container among several. Not one bag strapped to a climate control frame or sealed inside a pressure-rated shell. Just one bag, soft-sided, slung over one shoulder, with what appeared to be a small patch stitched onto the front of it. The clerk leaned slightly to read it. It said Earth. Below that, in smaller letters, "We tried." The human set the bag down on the counter, slid her registration chip across, and said, "Dara Okafor. Exchange Program, Xenobiology Track." The clerk processed this. He looked at the bag again. "Is the rest of your equipment being shipped separately?" "This is it," Dara said. He stamped her card and said nothing else, because there was nothing useful to say. Concordia Station was not a small place. It ran 3 academic wings, 2 research floors, 1 containment facility that nobody talked about at dinner, and a common area large enough to feel like the inside of a small city. Students from 11 species moved through it at all hours. The Allurans traveled in pairs and left faint trails of bioluminescence on the floor when they were excited, which was often. The Thessians moved quickly and with great precision, like insects who had decided to become academics. The Dorothi moved slowly and said very little and were usually right about everything. Dara moved through orientation with her hands in her pockets. The orientation was held in the main lecture chamber, a tiered room that curved upward on all sides, so that every seat had a clear view of the central floor. Professor Vreel stood at the center. He was Thessian's 6 limbs, iridescent exoskeleton, eyes that caught the light at angles that made them look like polished coins. He had been teaching xenobiology at Concordia for 30 years, and he had, in that time, developed the particular kind of confidence that comes from being correct more often than not. He began with a standard overview of the exchange program's goals. Then he moved to what he called species environment context briefings, which was his way of explaining to students that some of their fellow students came from places that were, biologically speaking, unreasonable. He pulled up a star map. He highlighted a small, single-moon planet in an unremarkable system. Earth, he said, home world of our human exchange students this cycle. He paused. It is important to understand the ecological profile of this planet before engaging with its natives socially, because it will provide useful context. He brought up a list. It was long. It scrolled. Several students shifted in their seats. The list was a catalog of Earth's apex predators, compiled from the Galactic Biological Survey. It included weight ranges, hunting methods, territory sizes, and a threat assessment score for each entry. Most of the scores were in ranges that, by galactic convention, required special permits just to study from a distance. Soli, sitting 2 seats from Dara, made a soft sound. Her bioluminescence flickered pale blue, which was the Alluran equivalent of going cold with shock. Breck, the young Guarani on Dara's other side, had stopped writing notes and was just staring at the display. Vreel clicked through entries with professional calm. He described an animal called a saltwater crocodile, then something called a polar bear, then a category of animals, sharks, which he noted existed in multiple sizes and attack patterns. He spent some time on wolves. He spent more time on big cats. He pulled up a large image. It was a Bengal tiger. The photograph had clearly been taken at close range. The animal was lying in long grass, eyes open, looking directly at the camera with an expression that did not contain anything resembling concern. It was large, very large, the kind of large that, by the biological threat index, placed it in the same category as several species that entire galactic fleets had needed to deal with. Vreel said, "This animal is classified as an ambush predator. It is capable of speed sufficient to close distance before most humanoid species can process the threat. Its jaw pressure is sufficient to crush bone. It is territorial, largely solitary, and has no natural predators in its environment." He looked out at the lecture hall. Earth has several thousand of them. The room was very quiet. Vreel nodded, satisfied with this response. He was preparing to move to his next point when a hand went up near the front. He looked at the human student. She had her elbow on the desk and her chin resting on her hand, and she looked like someone waiting for a bus. Yes, he said. I have one of those, Dara said. Her name is Princess. She sleeps on my bed. Nobody moved. Vril looked at her. She looked back. She did not appear to be joking. She did not appear to be performing anything. She had the expression of someone who had just mentioned a moderately interesting fact about their commute. Breck made a sound like air leaving a punctured container. Soli's bioluminescence went completely out for 3 full seconds. Then it came back, pale and unsteady. Vril set down his pointer. He looked at Dara Okafor for a long moment. Then he looked back at his notes. Then at her again. I see, he said. He did not see. Not yet. But he was already, without knowing it, beginning to look. 3 days after orientation, Vril found Dara Okafor in the shared lab eating a meal out of a container that smelled like something had been roasted, seasoned heavily, and then roasted again. She was reading from a data pad with one hand and eating with the other, and she did not look up when he entered, which was not the typical response students had to his presence. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. She looked up, clocked him, and said, Professor, in the tone of someone acknowledging a fact. He placed his own data pad on the table. He had spent 2 days compiling the Galactic Threat Index entry for Bengal tigers. It was thorough. It had subsections. He turned it to face her. I want to discuss your claim from orientation, he said. Dara pulled the pad closer and actually read it. Then she pushed it back. The weight range is off, she said. Princess is 174 kilograms. Not the 136 this says. Vril opened his mouth and closed it. The database entry is based on field surveys conducted over. She gets weighed every 6 months at the vet, Dara said. 174. Last I checked, that beats the database. He looked at her. She went back to her food. He recalibrated. The entry also describes tigers as ambush predators with strongly territorial behavior. Solo hunters. Threat response to unfamiliar beings is typically aggressive. He paused. You sleep in the same room as this animal. Same bed, Dara said. How large is the bed? Standard double. She takes up most of it. I've learned to sleep on the edge. Vril sat back. He was a scientist. He believed in data. The data described an animal that should not be in a domestic environment. And yet this human was talking about sleeping arrangements with the tone of someone discussing mild inconvenience. He tried a different angle. Your species must have developed some biological adaptation, he said. Enhanced pheromone production, perhaps, or a specific vocalization that functions as a calming signal. Dara put her container down and looked at him for the first time with something other than mild attention. She looked briefly like she was trying not to smile. We raised her from a cub, she said. She trusts us. That's it. That cannot be it. It really is. He went back to his office and looked up domestication. He had known the word, of course. He had not previously considered it in depth because it had always seemed like a minor footnote in Earth's biological profile. He now discovered it was not a footnote. It was the entire chapter. He called an old Asa, the Dorothea Emeritus who had been at Concordia so long that the station had essentially been built around her. He showed her the tiger data. He presented his biological adaptation hypothesis. Asa sat quietly for a moment. Then she said, Look up the dog. Vril looked it up. He found an animal that had started as a wolf and had, over thousands of years, been so thoroughly integrated into human households that it now came in versions small enough to fit in a pocket. Same base animal. Different context. Entirely different behavioral profile. He kept reading. He found horses humans had ridden them into battle, sitting on top of an animal that weighed half a ton and could kill a humanoid with one strike, at a full run, in a conflict zone. He found accounts of humans using birds with killing talons as hunting partners. He found a historical record of a human soldier who had kept a bear. He sat at his desk for a long time. Asa, who had not left, said, You are still asking how. The more interesting question is why the animals agreed. He had no answer for that. The next afternoon, he passed the common area and stopped in the doorway without meaning to. Dara was sitting with Soli and Breck. Soli was asking questions with the careful energy of someone who very much wanted information and was also slightly scared to receive it. Breck was leaning forward on all 4 arms, wearing the expression of a student who had just found his favorite subject. Dara had her data pad open to her photos. On the screen, large and gold and completely relaxed, Princess was lying on a couch. Dara's younger brother was sitting on the floor beside her, working on his own pad. One of Princess's front paws was resting on the boy's leg. The boy had not looked up. He was just sitting there with 174 kilograms of apex predator using him as a cushion, and he clearly did not find this remarkable in any way. Soli made a very quiet sound. Breck said something in Guarani that the translation unit rendered as an expression of pure wonder. Dara scrolled to the next photo. Princess was wearing a small red bow around one ear. She looked deeply unimpressed. Dara's mother was visible in the background, laughing. "She hates the bow," Dara said. "But she lets my mom put it on her every year for her birthday. She just sits there and waits for it to be over." Vril walked back to his office. He opened his research proposal. The working title was Irrational Risk Behavior in Human Socialization Patterns. He stared at it. Then he deleted it. He typed a new title. Stared at that too. Deleted it. He sat with a blank title field and the cursor blinking. He knew one thing. He had been asking the wrong questions from the start. The right ones were harder, and he was not certain yet that his field had the tools to answer them. But he would find out. He saved the document and went back to reading. He had a feeling this would take some time. The research proposal was approved on a Tuesday. Vril received the confirmation while eating breakfast and read it 3 times to make sure he had not misunderstood the funding committee's response, because they had approved it in under 48 hours and attached a note saying 2 other departments wanted to co-author. He had expected resistance. He had prepared arguments. He had written a 4-page justification document that he now did not need. He went to find Dara. She was in the observation garden, a pressurized atrium near the station's outer ring where a small collection of plants from various worlds grew in carefully controlled soil beds. She was sitting on a bench with her legs stretched out, doing nothing in particular, which Vril had come to understand was something humans did by choice and not because something had gone wrong. He told her the proposal had been approved. She said that was good. He told her it meant formal interviews, recorded sessions, behavioral observation. She said that was fine. He asked if she had any concerns about the process. She thought about it. "Don't misquote me in the paper," she said. He assured her he would not and sat down across from her with his recording equipment. The first session lasted 2 hours. Vril asked questions and Dara answered them in the direct, unhurried way. She answered everything. She described Princess's daily routine in detail. Morning feeding raw meat, specific cuts, a supplement added to the food for joint health, because Princess was getting older and her back legs had been stiff since the previous winter. Grooming sessions, which Princess initiated by walking up to whoever was nearest and sitting on them until they started scratching behind her ears. Play behavior, which involved a rope toy the size of a small tree branch and required the human participant to hold on with both hands. Vril asked about behavioral correction. "She bit me twice," Dara said. "During play. Not hard, she was pulling back most of the force, but it was still a bite." Vril wrote this down very carefully. "And what did you do?" I said no. Firm voice, direct eye contact. Didn't move away. "And the animal's response?" She stopped, looked at me, did it one more time to check if I meant it. I said no again. She hasn't done it since. Across the table, one of Vril's colleagues, a Thessian biologist named Ferrith who had asked to sit in on the session, had gone very still. This was the Thessian equivalent of being deeply unsettled. Vril kept his voice level. "You corrected the behavior of a 174-kilogram apex predator using your voice and eye contact." "Yes." Without moving away. Moving away would have told her she won. Ferrith left the room. They heard his footsteps in the corridor, moving quickly. Dara watched him go with a mildly curious expression. "Is he all right?" she asked. "He will recover," Vril said. He did not actually know this for certain. The second session happened 3 days later. Vril had prepared more specific questions about Princess's early life, her time as a cub at the sanctuary, where Dara's family worked, the first months of integration into the household, the specific process by which a young tiger had come to understand that the humans around her were her family and not a threat or a prey item. Dara answered everything. At the end of the session, he asked if it would be possible to arrange a brief communication with her family. For the research, he said, to provide additional observational context. Dara shrugged and pulled out her personal communicator. The call connected after a moment. Dara's mother appeared on screen, warm and cheerful, wearing a patterned wrapper and standing in what was clearly a kitchen. She greeted Dara easily and said hello to the alien professor with the calm friendliness of someone who had met many unusual things in her life and found them interesting rather than alarming. In the background, visible over her shoulder, Princess was lying on a long sofa. She was awake. Her eyes were open, amber and clear, tracking something outside the frame. Her tail moved once. The sofa, Vreel noted, was very large and Princess occupied most of it. While he was processing this, Dara's brother walked through the background. He was carrying something and moving with the distracted energy of someone mid-task. Without breaking stride or looking down, he dropped his free hand onto Princess's head as he passed. His fingers pushed briefly through her fur. Princess made a sound low, a deep resonance that Vreel felt more than heard through the communicator's speakers. The brother kept walking. He disappeared around a corner. Princess put her head back down. Vreel realized he had not said anything for some time. Dara's mother was telling him something about the sanctuary's history, how they had received Princess after her mother was lost, how the first months had been difficult in specific ways she described practically and without drama. He was nodding and making notes, and also watching the spot on the sofa where Princess lay with her eyes half closed. The call ended after 20 minutes. Dara closed her communicator. Vreel sat for a moment. Then he opened his research document. He scrolled to the title field, which he had left blank. He typed, Persistent Mutualism and Apex Trust Integration, the Human Anomaly. He read it back. He left it. Somewhere in the station's corridors, Ferrith was probably still recovering. 3 other departments wanted to co-author. Vreel had spent 30 years studying living things and thought he understood most of what mattered. He was beginning to suspect he had missed something very large. Word travels fast on a station with limited square footage and nothing more interesting happening than the usual academic work. By the time Vreel organized his formal seminar, word had already spread across every wing, every floor, and most of the maintenance staff. The room he had booked held 96 people. He arrived early and found it already full, with additional attendees standing along the back wall. He had titled the seminar, Predator Integration in Human Civilization. He had not expected it to become a social event. He presented his findings in order. He started small Princess specifically, the data from the interviews, the behavioral profile, the video call observation. He noted the 174 kilogram weight discrepancy with the existing database, which prompted him to update the record live on the projection. Several students in the front row watched this happen with the expressions of people watching something mildly historic. Then he expanded the frame. He showed the timeline of human domestication. Not just tigers, the full scope of it, laid out in chronological order, beginning over 15,000 years ago with the wolf and ending with the present day. He showed the threat index ratings of each animal before integration. He showed the behavioral profiles after. He spent several minutes on horses because the numbers were, in his professional opinion, frankly embarrassing for every other species in the room. The idea that any being would look at an animal that large and fast and prone to panic and decide the correct response was to sit on it voluntarily, repeatedly, for thousands of years was not something the galactic biological record had prepared anyone for. He then presented his core hypothesis, that humans do not experience threat paralysis in the same way as other known species. That when confronted with something dangerous, a meaningful portion of the human population experiences fear and then, uniquely, overrides it through a secondary process with no clear galactic parallel. He called this process, in the paper, persistent proximity tolerance. Dara had read this term in the draft and told him that humans just called it getting used to things. A Garani professor near the middle of the room raised a hand. The humans who first attempted this must have died in significant numbers. He had barely finished the sentence when Dara, sitting in the front row, said without looking up from her notes, "Sure, but the ones who didn't kept going." Silence. Breck, in the back, made a short sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a bark. Soli's bioluminescence ran a warm gold ripple from her shoulders to her hands, which was not a color Vreel had seen from her before. The Garani professor sat down. He appeared to be thinking very hard about something. Vreel continued the presentation. He covered what he called the trust threshold, the point at which a dangerous animal shifts from threat assessment to social integration, and the human method of reaching it, which could be summarized, bluntly, as show up every day, provide food, and do not run away when the animal is frightened. He noted, with some discomfort, that this method was so simple that several of his faculty colleagues had initially refused to accept that it worked. He noted further that the galactic record contained no other species that had attempted it systematically and succeeded at scale. He ended the formal portion of the session. The room broke into discussion. Afterward, Vril found himself standing at the large viewport that ran along the far wall of the seminar room. Outside it, the gas giant turned slowly in the dark, enormous and indifferent. He had stood at this window many times after difficult lectures and found it clarifying. He did not notice Dara until she was standing beside him. They were quiet for a moment. He asked her, without planning to, whether she missed Princess. Yes, she said simply. Then, she probably misses me too. That's the harder part. He asked what she meant. When I'm not home, Dara said. She sits by the front door and waits. Doesn't matter if I've been gone for 6 hours or 6 weeks. She just sits there. She paused. Try explaining that to someone who's never seen it. A 174-kilogram predator, sitting by a door, waiting. Vril looked out at the gas giant. My species has no equivalent, he said. The concept that a predator would wait for someone, that it would want someone to return. Most species either avoided their predators or got eaten by them, Dara said. We did something else. He looked at her. What was the something else? She watched the gas giant for a moment. The light from it was amber and slow. We just kept showing up, she said. He thought about the wolf becoming a dog, the wild horse becoming a war horse, a tiger cub becoming princess, amber-eyed on a sofa, purring when a boy walked past and touched her head without even looking. He thought about what all of those transitions had in common, and he found that Dara had just named it more precisely than any of the language in his paper. He said, I may need to revise the conclusion section. She said, I'm going to want credit. You will be in the acknowledgments. Acknowledgments, she said, in the tone of someone filing a grievance for later. He almost smiled. It was a small thing, and he was not sure his exoskeleton showed it clearly, but it was there. They stood at the window a while longer. Outside, the gas giant kept turning. Neither of them felt the need to fill the quiet, which Vril was beginning to think might be another human quality he had failed to properly account for. The alarm was not loud. That was the first thing Dara noticed. It was a low, steady tone, not the high shriek of a fire or pressure event, which meant it was a containment issue rather than a structural one. She had read the station's emergency codes during her first week because she had found the manual in her welcome packet, and that was what you did with manuals. She was in the corridor near the xenobiology wing when it sounded. The other 3 students ahead of her turned and moved quickly in the opposite direction, toward the designated assembly area. This was the correct response. The emergency protocol was clear. Dara turned toward the xenobiology wing. She was not entirely certain why she did this. She would not have been able to explain it well in the moment. It was something more like instinct than decision, the same pull she felt when Princess came out of anesthesia scared and disoriented, and the vet staff stepped back, and Dara stepped forward instead. The wing had partially sealed. One interior door was still cycling. She moved through it before it finished closing. The corridor was empty. Ahead of her, she could hear something, a dry, scraping sound, irregular, like claws on a hard surface. She knew from the research logs what was housed in the containment section. She had read the species profiles. She knew about the Vorkai. It was approximately 2 meters long, scaled, low to the ground, built for short, fast bursts of speed. The survey profile described it as an ambush predator from a high-competition ecosystem. It was also, according to the same profile, currently listed as extremely stressed due to transport conditions and adjustment to captivity. She rounded the corner slowly. The Vorkai was in the side corridor, backed against the far wall. 2 researchers, a young Dorothy and a Garani she recognized from the biology floor, were in the lab doorway to her left. The Dorothy had a cut on her arm. Neither of them was moving, which was the right call. The Vorkai's body was low and its head was weaving in the way that, in every predator Dara had ever studied, meant it was deciding. It had not decided yet. That was the important part. Dara stopped. She did not move quickly. She did not make any sudden sound. She crouched down slowly, making herself smaller, lower, less vertical, less like a standing threat. She let out a slow, audible breath. Not a word, just breath. Steady and even. The Vorkai's head swung toward her. She looked at it. Not a hard stare that was a challenge. Something more level. Present but not aggressive. She breathed again. She waited. The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere deeper in the station, another alarm tone pulsed once and stopped. The Vorkai took 2 steps toward her. She did not move. It stopped. Its head came up slightly, testing the air. She kept breathing at the same rate, and she did not look away, and she did not move, and she thought about Princess after the vet, crouched in the corner of the transport crate, making a sound like tearing metal, and how the only thing that had worked was sitting on the floor outside the crate and waiting until Princess decided to come out on her own. You could not hurry that. You could only be there. A minute passed. Maybe 2. The response team arrived at the far end of the corridor. She heard them before she saw them, the sound of equipment, boots, multiple voices. The Vorkai heard it too. Its head dropped again. Its weight shifted forward. Dara said quietly, "Hey." The animal's eyes came back to her. 2 more minutes, she said, without looking away from the Vorkai. She was talking to the response team, not the animal. Just wait 2 more minutes. There was a pause. Then the team leader's voice, flat and controlled, acknowledged. She breathed. The Vorkai breathed. The corridor stayed still. At some point, she could not have said exactly when the tension changed. The Vorkai's head came up in a different way. Its weight settled back. It turned, slowly, and moved toward the corner at the far end of the corridor, away from everyone. It curled into the angle of the wall. The response team moved in carefully and got the containment frame positioned without further incident. The 2 researchers were helped out of the doorway. The Dorothy's arm was not serious. Afterward, in the debrief room, the station director asked Dara what she had done and why. She said she had read a stressed animal. She said it was not hunting, it was frightened. She said you do not respond to a frightened animal by adding more threat to the situation, because that narrows its options down to 1, and you do not want to be the one standing there when an apex predator feels it has only 1 option left. Someone in the room asked, "Were you not afraid?" Dara considered this seriously, the way she considered most things. "Yes," she said. "But being afraid doesn't mean you stop moving." Vreel was at the back of the room. He did not ask any questions during the debrief. He wrote something in his notes when she gave that last answer. He underlined it. Then he sat looking at the underline for a long time while the rest of the debrief continued around him. He did not underline things often. When he did, it usually meant he had found the part of something that mattered most and had not understood until now. This felt like one of those times. The paper took Vreel 11 more days to finish after the incident. He rewrote the conclusion 4 times. The 4th version was shorter than the first by half, which he had found, over the course of a long career, was usually the sign that he had finally said what he actually meant. He found Dara in the observation garden the morning before she was due to leave. She was on a video call, the screen propped on her knee, and she was not speaking, just watching. Vreel stopped at a respectful distance and waited. On the screen, Princess was on Dara's bed. She was lying on her back with all 4 legs in the air in a position that was, by any mechanical analysis of a predator's body, completely absurd. Dara's brother walked past in the background and said something that made Dara laugh quietly. Princess did not move. Her tail swung once, lazily, and then stopped. The call ended. Dara pocketed the communicator. She looked up at Vreel. He sat down across from her. He had the paper in his hands, printed on physical pages, which he almost never did. He had done it this time because it felt like the right way to give it to someone. "I wanted you to see the final version before it goes to publication," he said. She took it and read. She was a fast reader and she read everything, which he had noticed in the first week and which he now understood was not unique to her, but seemed to be a broadly human trait. She turned pages. She paused twice. She reached the last page and read it, and then she sat for a moment looking at it. "The last paragraph," she said. "Yes." She read it aloud, not performing it, just reading. "We have cataloged the apex predators of Earth with great thoroughness. We have measured their speed, mapped their territories, recorded their kills. We have, in our analysis, consistently overlooked the most dangerous organism in those ecosystems. It is the one that looked at all the others and said, 'I wonder if it wants a name.'" She was quiet for a moment. Then she handed the pages back. "It's good," she said. "You should keep it exactly like that." He said he intended to. He also turned to the cover page and showed her where, beneath the title, in small text, he had written, "Dedicated, with significant academic discomfort, to Princess. Dara looked at it for a moment. Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, or not only a smile. Something quieter than that. She'll never know, Dara said. No, Vreel agreed. But you will. And you can tell her. Dara looked at him. You know she won't understand what I'm saying. She will understand, he said, that you are talking to her. I am told that is the part that matters. He had not planned to say that. He was not entirely certain where it had come from. But it seemed to land somewhere true because Dara did not argue with it. They sat in the garden for a little longer. The plants around them grew in their slow and silent way, each from a different world, none of them aware of the others, all of them doing fine regardless. The docking bay was busy that afternoon. Departing students moved through it with their equipment, the climate control pods, the pressure shells, the sensory dampeners. Dara moved through it with her one bag, the patch on the front catching the light. Earth. We tried. Soli found her first and pressed a small object into her hands, a bioluminescent pendant, round and pale, that pulsed softly with a color that had no name in most galactic languages, but was close to the feeling of relief. She said it was a traveling token. She said you gave it to someone when you wanted them to come back. Breck gripped both her hands in all four of his and said nothing for a moment, because some things, in Guarani, were better said without words. Then he said, in common, tell Princess I said she sounds like a reasonable person. Dara laughed. I'll pass it along. Vreel came last. He stood somewhat apart from the others, the way academics did when they were not certain of the correct social form for a situation. He handed her a copy of the paper, a second printed copy he had made for this reason. For your records, he said, since you were mentioned. In the acknowledgments, she said, with the same tone of a filed grievance from weeks ago. In the dedication, he said. She looked at him. He said, you came here as a subject of study. You leave as the reason for the most significant revision my field has made in a decade. I thought it appropriate to be clear about that distinction. She tucked the paper carefully into her bag. The departure tone sounded through the bay. She picked up her bag. She looked back once at Soli and Breck and Vreel and the rest of the station that had, over the months, become something that felt like a place she knew. She said, I'll send pictures when I get home. She meant of Princess. Everyone knew she meant of Princess. The idea of receiving photographs of a 174-kilogram apex predator wearing a birthday bow, transmitted across the galactic relay from a death world to an academic research station, should have been strange. It did not feel strange. It felt like exactly the right thing to do. Dara Okafor walked through the docking gate, onto the transport, and went home.